Right, welcome to week 9. This week we're dealing with the structure of the presidency. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the development of the institution of the presidency. Of course, we know that in early history, presidents had very few servants. They weren't particularly well trained. It took a long time for the cabinet as an advisory body to reach a level of professionalization that they were effective. Um, Certainly, the presidency and the institutions immediately surrounding the president, what we might call sort of the White House staff, for quite some time was again, more clerical rather than actually, have well trained. I think that largely reflects the fact that in well into the 19th century, the United States didn't really have much in the way of a formal educational system. You didn't really have well-established colleges that that a regular person could actually attend. So that there were just not that many people, and I think just generally the perception of what it was that a staff person was supposed to do really didn't begin to change until around the Civil War. Now, in terms of just the overall rise of the presidential establishment, a big part of that, and a big part of where you really see a leap in terms of professionalization, is when Congress and the president began fighting over the executive bureaucracy. And a big part of that revolves around the budget power. Um, at least initially, there was a lot of conflict in the early part of the 20th century over who should have control over the budget for the executive bureaucracies. And eventually, we ended up with the creation of the Bureau of the Budget. The next great kind of expansion of executive staffing comes with the New Deal. And of course, with the New Deal, there's this huge expansion of staffing and programs. And that, of course, leads to the Brownlow Commission and eventually the creation of the Executive Office of the President, which again is a huge kind of force multiplier in terms of presidential capacity to act from the White House rather than to have to deal with kind of the cabinet. Um, I think an interesting question, certainly for contemporary politics, is Donald Trump and the extent to which he's actually using, to which he has actually gathered the reins of power and is effectively using the White House and the executive staffing system to expand his power. And my initial suspicion, more than 2 years in, is that part of the reason for his ineffectiveness is just generally his unwillingness to expand the group of people that he trusts beyond a very small number. And the reality is that staff equals capacity in a very, very, very significant way. And so, there's a real question as to whether Donald Trump's going to be able to be effective as a president going forward. And a big part of that is, he can't keep chiefs of staff that he actually trusts, largely because, again, the role of the chief of staff is to try and actually, rein the president in, get them disciplined. And he absolutely refuses to be disciplined. He wants to act on impulse. Um, the fact that the presidency has become fairly tightly centralized creates problems. This is something that Bill Clinton discovered when they tried to do the big healthcare initiative. The reality is that a centralized presidency has a lot of power, but that doesn't always mean that that gets translated into action. And the fact that the Clinton healthcare initiative failed was largely owing to the fact that they couldn't build the kinds of coalitions that they needed within Congress to get the bill passed. I think Obama kind of learned that lesson and said, you know what, I understand this is sausage making, and I'm going to let Congress make the sausage. And that's pretty much what they did. Of note, of course, is the rising importance of vice presidents. I think certainly in the post-World War II era, people have rapidly come to the realization that the presidency as an institution is too great for any one person to be able to gather all the reins of power. And certainly the most effective administrations have been those that have been able to use the vice presidency as a way of getting lower level, lower priority kinds of projects off the ground and worked through. Uh, Presidents' spouses are also increasingly important, albeit they typically don't involve themselves in especially political things. I think the most popular presidential spouses have been the ones that have kept a relatively low profile, have adopted relatively apolitical issues. I think Michelle Obama is a very popular, was a very popular first lady, and I think she was very effective largely because she focused on things that people thought were worthy efforts. Childhood obesity, exercise, nutrition. These are issues that I think most people didn't really have a problem with. So I think there's a lot to talk about this week, and hopefully hopefully we'll have a good week of conversation.